Hello, this is Clarence Moye with Awards Daily, here with two of my very favorite actors, Cherry Jones and Vera Farmiga, from Apple TV Plus's 5 Days at Memorial. And if you haven't seen that show, you should drop everything right now, go watch it, and then come back and watch this interview. Cherry and Vera, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Clarence. And I appreciate the spotlight because it's not easy watching pain and suffering. It's not.
It
So
is not, but it is ultimately just it's a very powerful piece of work. It's a very powerful piece of I hesitate to call it entertainment because it
right.
is entertaining, but it's painful to watch. I'll get into that in just a second. But I wanted to start with sort of what drew you both to this project. I'll start with you, Vera. I know that I've read that when you look at new projects, you know generally within the first 10 or so pages, I think you have said historically, of whether or not this speaks to you. What spoke to you about this project?
Yeah, well, I just have an alliance with Carlton Cuse from the Bates Motel days. I mean, that's one of my favorite roles I've ever had the joy to portray. And so I think we are, I couldn't wait for the next opportunity, and I knew it was a matter of time. And then I do get, because same with Norma Bates' role, he always tasks me with coming to the great defense of a female character. But for me personally, I do know within 10 pages. It usually stems from the characterization for me. As far as the role of Dr. Anna Poe, I think I'm just always curious about women who persevere through extraordinary things, who rise above challenges, and I, with this character, I guess you could say I got my mind blown. It's a little sort of chemical thing that happens in my brain where I feel tremendous empathy for the character. I have a deep curiosity about her. I have an immediate fascination with her, and with this one, I think that her moxie, her strength of character, her skill, her perseverance, her determination, and stamina were very tantalizing. And then there was just, this willingness to come to her defense and present a case for her.
Of course. Before we jump to you, Cherry, I just have to say, Vera, when I was doing press on Bates Motel, I did ask Carrie, I begged her, actually, the showrunner, Carrie Aaron, to not follow tradition and to flip the script and not have Norman kill Norma, because I did not want to lose Norma in my life. She was such a fantastic, strong
I didn't
character.
want to lose Norma in my life, and that was the trapeze act for me. And I actually suggested, I said, why don't we do a choose your own adventure scenario where we film multiple endings? This way we can just keep going. But anyway, thank you.
I never got to see that because I don't watch enough television, and I'm now going to go back and enjoy you in that.
Terry, it's real Carol Burnett kind of stuff.
Is it really? Is it?
Yeah.
Fun. Oh, good. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Cherry, I also read that you tend to gravitate toward projects that have a lot of social impact. What do you anticipate that people should get from the show? Is that what attracted you to 5 Days? And what do you think people should take away from it?
Well, I was just so grateful to get that script. It was almost too good to be true that someone was actually making that series. And I was sent it at the end of 2020 when we were just smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, and not that we're not now, just don't know it necessarily. And most everyone's hearts were bleeding for healthcare providers. And if they weren't continually worried about our healthcare providers, something was wrong with them, because these people were risking their lives and the lives of their families. Every single day they were caring for a COVID patient in a hospital. I watched my little hospital be really almost destroyed by COVID because there were so many patients, and they've lost so much staff because of the treatment of the healthcare workers and the stress they were put under. So healthcare workers were in the forefront of my mind, and to see a series about healthcare workers being put in the most difficult, horrific place, short of war nurses and doctors, nothing could be worse than what these people went through as healthcare providers. So I very much wanted to be part of it. The only thing that was difficult for me is that I have almost too much respect for nurses, and therefore I've never really played a nurse before, and I never wanted to play a nurse because they're superhuman to me. Mm-hmm. They're usually more fun than anybody else in the world. They all have sort of they're party animals. The nurses I know, after they go in and spend all day doing what they do, they need that release. But that was my greatest concern, was that I was not gonna, be able to do Susan Molderic justice. But I think I've answered your question.
Well, it's a great segue, because you're both playing obviously real life people, Susan Molderic, Dr. Anna Poe. I know Susan has remained largely a persona non grata in terms of press or any kind of interactions about her time at Memorial during, the Katrina incident and the aftermath. What was both of your relationships to your real life's character? I mean, how did you determine how you wanted to portray them? Was it strictly there on the script? Were you, talking to real life people who interacted with them?
Yes, well, I did not have Anna. She was not part of the process. And I've played a lot of real life models in my career, from Lee Hart to Lorraine Warren, even, that you do get a chance to befriend them, and there's just so much value there. And so I was panicked not having her. And it's funny, and the internet is quite scrubbed of, like, if you try to find the Morley Safer interview, I mean, good luck. I don't think you're going to find it. But Sherry Fink was my everything in this, and her investigative journalism. And she did the grind work for me. There's 500 plus pages in 5 days of Memorial. And also she took copious notes, and she scribed all of her notes post-interview with Anna, with Anna's family members, with Anna's friends, with Anna's colleagues, with Anna's patients. She was very thorough. And so I had a pretty darn good idea, right? You want to know who, like, Clarence, if I was going to play you, I wouldn't necessarily go to you to get an idea, a full picture of who you are. I would go to your mom. I would go to your siblings. I would go to your teachers. And so there was a lot of information to be mined from many, many interviews that Sherry Fink had done. And of course I had several. I could watch her, and because it was a challenge when portraying a real person, although I am portraying a real person, but it is also a character that I am playing, because we're not treating this as a documentary or she wasn't a part of it. So we, and yet I still felt that obligation to capture that, capture her spirit. And it's a responsibility that I took seriously. So watching whatever footage I did have of her, the 60 Minutes interview and Radio Garland, and I think the biggest treasure that I mined from that was an aspect of a character that we don't often get to include in our performances, which is spirituality, which is her Roman Catholicism was huge, and a huge part of how she navigated that time in the hospital, her relationship to her concept of God, and how that brought her through the thick and thin of it all. And that was a real interesting fish hook for me into the portrayal of the role.
Cherry, what about you? Susan famously, as I mentioned before, she wanted nothing to do with anything after that. She never talked about it. How did you figure out who she was?
Um, well, again, the Bible was, it is a funny thing because I'm not really playing Susan Milderick because she never said one word, I say, in this whole series, except emergency. I'm sure she used emergency, and you know what I mean. And but Cherry would send us these packets of information about our characters. She would put together these extraordinary thick binders of information about our characters, including for Susan, even though she never interviewed Susan. What I got for Susan was a deposition that she had given. So her answers to all of these questions that were so helpful to know the answers to from her point of view. She also sent me this deep background information that she couldn't put into the book. That was the most helpful of all, because it really told me the essence of who the woman was, as best any deep background could ever do. So that was those were my main tools for her, and the fact that she's a nurse.
Right. Well, my wife and I tend to binge television, but this series we could not binge it. We had to take it in weekly increments because it is so intense. It is so painful to watch at many times. It is very authentic. I can't imagine what it was like. Just for us to watch and experience that hospital, those 5 days in that hospital, and the how it was deteriorating day by day. The conditions were just unimaginable. What was it like for you both as actors, being on that set and being in that much angst with these characters day in and day out?
Anxiety is infectious. so when I see Cherry's beautiful face, which is always so rich with subtext, right? These quiet moments. I love watching her as an actress because every moment is so full of thought. And I love how thought plays out across her face. And it's like, you just get sucked in. There's also the just phenomenal actors, but that energy is, it catches on. But also we are surrounded by the most impeccable art design. And you see Pampers full of shit, smeared with I don't know what concoctions they came up with, but they were incredibly inventive. And hundreds and hundreds of, the hospital was full with not only of patients, but it was a beacon. It was like a beacon of safety, and it was a refuge for the community members. So there were so many people in this space as we were shooting it, but it's what's hard keeping track is because there's 5 days of distress, right? 5 days, like every new piece of information that we receive is just that much more distressing and that much more debilitating, and so it's not easy keeping I have a huge shut-off valve, and coping mechanism when I do these kinds of roles. Look, I don't enjoy doing these kind of roles. They're not enjoyable for me. What's enjoyable is the interactions that I have with the actors. But I think good and hard before taking something like this, because I don't know. It is stress. It's stress on my body. And I don't even pretend to experience it anywhere near the amount of stress that these poor souls experienced. Yeah. But in order for it to bring it alive and make it real for you, you've got to be authentic in delivering the emotional aspect of these performances and keeping track of it as well, which was, I found just sort of the keeping track of the varying sort of desperation, moments of desperation. But I don't know, it's hella easier when you got a scene partner like her, watching her, I mean, these mind-blowing scenes where she has pages and pages of dialogue of instruction, and watching her just stuff down any insecurity about it, stuff down all those, and trying to lead above all of, that demoralizing information that's coming your way. But yeah, it's easier when you've got scene partners like her.
Well, same to you, buddy. I remember we had so little to do together.
We had little to do together. The moments are big. The moments that we do have are big within the plot of the story, but few and far between, Cherry.
Well, maybe that we now both know Carlton. Maybe we'll get to do something. We'll get to be complicated women together someday.
Well, I did read at some point you guys did talk about a reboot of Golden Girls, and I am 100% on board for that.
That one I would never touch. Talk about utter perfection. That and Designing Women, which I've just gotten to watch both of those in the last 6 years of my life. I never got to watch one because I was working in the theater, and I'm so in love with both those shows. I can't even stand it. I'm a little behind.
I was able to talk to Jean Smart for something recently for Hacks, and talking about Designing Women was for fun as well. Cherry, for as Vera mentioned, Susan is the emergency coordinator, so there's a lot of instructional. There's a lot of Susan has to take control of the situation. That is what she's there to do. She's also a nurse, but she is there to take control of this rapidly deteriorating situation. How do you go through or perform that dichotomy of a woman who is suffering just as much as anybody else, but also knows she has to put on a front of authority. She has to make everyone calm. She has to look like, she is in control, even though the manuals and all the procedures that are supposed to be there to help through these situations are completely absent.
Yeah. Well, it's, just levels of the frustration. I mean, besides the panic that she must have been under at all times, it would be just the incredulity and disappointment time and time again. Each time thinking that the helicopters are going to be coming one after another, and then realizing that there hasn't been one that's come yet. All of those moments that she had to contend with. And I had this disagreement with Mr. Ridley, who had written that she breaks down at one point in her mother's arms. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel that was right for Susan. And it was right after the hurricane had passed. They'd all made it through. It had been coming at them as a Cat 5. Even the hurricane had calmed down and actually hit 90 miles to the east of New Orleans. And even after the relief of that, he had me cry in my mother's arms. And I didn't really want to do it. But I'm so glad that he did write that, because you see the pressure that someone was under, keeping 2,000 people safe and alive during a Cat 5 approaching, or she thought it was a Cat 5 approaching. And that's at the end, I think, of the first episode or the beginning of the second episode. And it hasn't even begun what the story really is, And so you see her, what it cost just to get through that first night. And I didn't fully appreciate that at the time, but the strength that she showed as she continued. In fact, she was one of the last people to leave that hospital. So I will always have nothing but the utmost respect and awe of that actual woman. Yeah.
Absolutely. Vera, with Anna, she goes from what I'd like to say from trauma to trauma. She goes from the trauma of the lived experience of the hospital to the trauma of the aftermath. I'm talking about the trial, being arrested, and the threat of the trial. What is more challenging for you to play as an actress?
Oh, Oh, I saw the episodes 1 through 5, and then episodes 6 through 8 as two different movements within this within this musical piece. And I in the first one, she's trying to save 2,000. She's trying to save others, and in the second movement, she's trying to save herself. She's trying to save her reputation. She's trying to save her career. And the first part is quite a quiet. She, although my character speaks volumes, she does so with very few words. And it's more about action and service. And then, of course, I think then the pages come, pages of dialogue come in episode 8, where she's giving her testimony, and the floodgates open, and now she's got to speak for herself, and she's got to give her testimony. And so I found them to be sort of two very different approaches. One was more like a Zhang Yimou film, a quiet Zhang Yimou film, where subtext was so potent, and then I think also the second part was more about capturing Anna Poe's essence, with the Morley Safer interview and the fundraising scene, which was an 8-page monologue, pleading her case before that fundraising jury and for the jury of the audience. Yeah. Yeah. Always keeping in mind that this is what she's trained. She's trained what she does for a living, otolaryngology, uprooting cancer from heads and necks. She's trained for these traumatic events. She's trained, she's determined to she's she sees a lot of death. She has victories, but she goes through defeats. I mean, I don't know her track, but I mean, as a surgeon, as a cancer specialist, I think what your ultimate mission is to keep people comfortable if you can't save them.
I just want to interrupt to say I found it so interesting that I think it was in Sherry's book that she says that cancer surgeons know that their patients, some live, some die, but they rarely see people die because they don't die on the table for most cancer surgeries. So that moment when you see Dr. Baltz trying to save the patient, you in those moments too, you see all the different skills doctors have, that you weren't the one who was in there trying to save that patient from dying. I found so interesting.
Actually,
stand back and let the expert.
Well, that was an interesting, because I was supposed to. I actually studied many YouTube videos and could probably, if I had to, if push comes to shove, I could probably intubate someone. I've looked at so many medical videos on intubation, and actually,
I was on your resume.
I was an anatomy and physiology whiz in high school. I thought I was going to be an ophthalmologist. I mean, I thought that was my cardinal. But anyway, I was fully prepared, and we actually rehearsed that scene, Cherry, where because Dr. Poe did intubate, I think, and in Sherry's book, I mean, that's it. And for some reason, Carlton, as a storyteller, took that task away from her and made her more passive, watching and receiving the information of the loss of life. So in the original script, it was actually written that she's more active. Yeah.
Cherry, as we've mentioned, Susan, after the events of the hospital, she became very quiet. She became very introspective. She didn't comment a lot. But we do have a scene, a very unexpectedly challenging scene of Susan actually going back and still becoming involved by calling next of kin to notify those who had died. Talk to me about filming that scene. It must have been intense and
Well, I just can't imagine that they were put in that position after everything. And of course they were, because if anyone knew the patients, they were, two of the people who might have known. When actually they wouldn't have been, because Susan was just trying to keep the hospital going. I just can't imagine the looks on their faces when they were told that that was going to be their next task. So traumatized from what they'd been through. And then they have to get on the phones with those poor families who had no idea. I mean, that corporation had not gotten it together to let those people know that their loved ones were gone. You know, it's just one thing after another that is, you know, that started with people not being prepared and a country that wasn't prepared for this kind of disaster. And now that we know that it's going to be happening more and more and more frequently, Ian being, as you went through, to a lesser degree, you know, is a great example of that's where we are now. And I hope, if nothing else, this film will be seen by some brilliant young people who will, in the next few decades, make sure that people have at least some guidelines of how to behave in these catastrophes, because it's the least our health care workers are owed for what they do, is to have some guidelines that tell them how to proceed.
Right, because it is unfortunately becoming our new normal thanks to climate change.
And our healthcare workers are now our frontline soldiers.
Yes, absolutely. Especially after COVID and now, I mean, we're hearing an RSV virus that's going around, in fact, impacting children, and they've got, you know, hospital gurneys out in parking lots again because they're so overstaffed and there's not enough beds. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
It is.
Vera, we talked about your the monologue that you give as Anna toward the end of this show, where she, you know, she's at the fundraising opportunity and, you know, she kind of plays her case again. But then you're confronted by Dr. Baltz, who is played by Robert Pine, who has a different take on the same events that she's given. How do you play your reaction to that? Because Anna's just shocked and just, you know, you don't get another line of dialogue.
It's hard figuring that reaction out, and is to keep as blank a face as possible was, I think, the best solution for me, because I don't know Anna. I don't claim to presume anything about knowing about how she feels in hindsight about it, what she went through, who she is, what her thoughts are now about it, what they were then about it. And that was a very hard moment for me to figure out. And to be honest with you, it's interesting, Clarence, I gave Wendy Stansler, the director of that particular episode, I love giving my directors options to a degree, because God forbid they choose the wrong one. But sometimes you don't know what the right reaction is, and so you're gonna leave it, and it's a scary place to be, but you leave it to the editorial process. Most of the takes were blank faces, where I could still think my thoughts, and again, it depended on the take what those thoughts were, but again, it was probably the hardest moment for me to play, because I know how to play that role as Vera, but as a real life person in that moment, and that all has to do with hindsight being 2020. I really don't know or claim to know how Anna would play that moment. So that was a tricky one for me. And as just as surprising to see what they chose in the editing room.
And it's also, you're looking at the beneficent face of Mr. Robert Pine, aka Dr. Baltz, which also made it harder because he's so loving, and yet he's you know,
he was feisty in that scene, though. He was feisty. He was loving in that scene.
Yeah, no, he wasn't.
He was pushing that finger deep in my rib cage with that one,
which makes it even worse, you know, because you know how he is most of the time, and suddenly he turns into this tormentor of yours. Yeah.
So last question for both of you. The series obviously brings up the conversation of euthanasia, right? And what is humane when you're in circumstances like this. Did it, and I'm not asking you to go into, and if you certainly want to, that's your prerogative, but did it change your perspective that you might have had about this topic going into filming in this and sort of living these roles? And even though we're not living that circumstance, and hopefully we never do, did it change your perspective on what you might do in that situation if you were in that position?
You know, I've been in a part of intimate death processes. One with my grandmother, my babcia Nadia, and for 13 days, I didn't know it was possible for a human being to go without water and food for 13 days, only the moisture that was coming from her nebulizer. And watching my granny, who was a Ukrainian immigrant who went through rape, war, pillage, hunger, starvation, being orphaned at the age of 9, coming to America, creating a life for herself, and then having the most, and then having 25 years of Alzheimer's. It's almost like her body forgot how to pass. And watching her go through it, and I had never seen that death process before, and it wasn't my decision. I wasn't the elder in the space in terms of we had an in-home hospice situation where the I'm sorry, apologies, where the I'll just ignore that, where the syringe was in the refrigerator to alleviate, and days and days and days and days, but it wasn't my decision, but the amount of suffering that I saw her endure. And you'd think about these patients, to add to that oppressive heat,
Right.
add to that no food, no water, no electricities for ventilators, medical care suspended, they weren't receiving their medication. I mean, add to that all of those given circumstance. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I really don't. It was a hard decision to make. I wasn't even making the decision for my granny, but to watch her have, sometimes exits out of this life aren't easy, and you got one foot in and one foot out. And to see what was playing on her face, I mean, she was operating in a whole other dimension, and the only thing that I could do was sing her the Ukrainian songs that she taught me as a kid, and it's the only thing that I could see would bring her relief. I don't know. I still don't know how I feel about euthanasia.
Cherry, what about you?
I do think people who've been in your position with your grandmother, and I was in that position with my mother, probably have a very different idea about it than people who haven't been with loved ones dying. I can't say what I would do or even imagine what I would do, but I certainly know what I would like done for me.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
And for a loved one. Yeah.
I'm sort of going through it now with my mother, and it is a difficult thing watching someone deteriorate. But thank you. But thank you both for the time. Thank you for the performances. This is such people call things important, and that has a stigma about it, but it is an important series, and it is a tremendous piece of work. And I really applaud both of you for taking this on and for giving it the authenticity that it deserves. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And it was a great privilege of our lifetimes, I know, for both of us to get to work on it.
And with each other, Cherry. With you.
Absolutely.
Same at you, buddy.
All right. So Cherry, I think we'll see you next in Succession. Are you coming back to Succession, I hear?
I have a brief appearance. Okay.
And Vera, I'm so ready. I'm so sad that Lorraine is no longer with us, but I'm so excited about another.
I am too. I enjoy doing those so very much, and I enjoy my partnership with Patrick Wilson. So we're happy to bring another.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait. Thank you both, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Clarence.
Bye.